It now seems to me that the findings of more than 50 years of DNA research have provided materials for a new and enormously powerful argument from design. How am I doing on time, Dean? 5 minutes. Okay, thank you. Design is so prevalent that even people like Francis Crick, the co-discoverer of DNA, Sir Fred Hoyle, who coined the term Big Bang in a derisive way, are now, or were, proponents of panspermia. Seeds everywhere, in other words, that life got deposited here by aliens, which is just kind of a backhanded way of saying that there's no way we know how life came by natural causes here. There must be aliens out there that brought it here, which, of course, just puts the question off one more step. Where did the aliens come from, right? There's a lot more on the design argument, but I'm running out of time here. Let me just give you one quote from Chandra Wickramasinghe, who is a student of Sir Fred Hoyle. He said, "The emergence of life from a primordial soup on Earth is merely an article of faith." Sir Fred Hoyle said, "A common sense interpretation of the facts suggests that a super intellect has monkeyed with physics as well as chemistry and biology, and that there are no blind forces worth speaking about in nature." So cosmological argument, teleological argument. Now let's move on to the moral argument. If there is no God, you can't say that decapitating a man on a bus is objectively morally wrong. That's just your opinion. As Dostoevsky said, if there is no God, everything is permitted. Now, I want to be very clear here. I'm not saying that atheists can't know morality. They do. I'm not saying that atheists can't be moral. They can. I'm not saying that believing in God makes you more moral, as Christopher has pointed out, and as I say, I agree with much of what he writes here. I'm not saying that religious people are necessarily better than atheists. That's not the argument. The argument is that there's no way to say that a given act is moral or immoral unless there's a standard beyond humanity. It's not just my opinion, it's not just Christopher's opinion, or Mother Teresa's or Hitler's. There's a standard beyond everybody that defines what is right. That standard is God's very nature. Since objective moral laws exist, there must be an objective moral lawgiver. You say, no, there doesn't need to be any moral lawgiver. If there's a prescription, there must be a prescriber. If you go to the pharmacist and say, here, I'd like you to fill this prescription, and the pharmacist says, who prescribed it? And you go, nobody. Are you going to get your prescription? No. Now, there's a lot more on the moral argument. Maybe we can talk about it a little bit during the Q&A. But what can we learn from these three arguments for God? We can learn from the cosmological argument that this being must be spaceless, timeless, and immaterial. Why? Because it created space, time, and material. It must also be powerful. Why? Because it created out of nothing. Must be personal. Why? Because you can't go from a state of non-existence to a state of existence without making a choice, and only personal beings make choices. Impersonal forces do not. It must be intelligent. Why? Because it created in such a highly designed, razor's edge way. It must be moral. Why? Due to the moral argument, and of course it must be a creator. These attributes are the attributes of what the Bible would call God. Let me sum up what agnostic astronomer Robert Jastrow said after going through evidence like this. He said, for the scientist who has lived by his faith in the power of reason, remember he's the agnostic, the story ends like a bad dream. He has scaled the mountains of ignorance. He's about to conquer the highest peak. As he pulls himself over the final rock, he's greeted by a band of theologians who've been sitting there for centuries. 2 more minutes? Take 3. Thank you, sir. Those are the 3 main arguments. Now I'd like to say there's 4 additional truths about the universe that are better explained by theism than by atheism. First of all, reason and the laws of logic. Christopher is a self-described materialist, but if atheism is true, we have no grounds to know it because reason and thoughts are just chemical reactions in the brain. How can you have, even Einstein believed this. Einstein was a determinist. How can you trust what Christopher says if it's just chemical reactions going on in his brain and chemical reactions in our brain? See, chemicals don't reason, they react. Now, I'm not saying there's no connection between our thinking and chemicals. There is. But if it's nothing but chemicals, how can we trust them? Even Darwin recognized this. It's called Darwin's doubt. He said, if we are just the product materially of primates, why should I even trust anything, much less my theory of natural selection? The next major reason is the laws of mathematics. Science depends on the notion that the universe is rational and mathematical at all levels. But how does rationality in mathematics arise from randomness? How do they come from matter? Rationality and mathematics are the product of mind, not matter. So you got reason in the laws of logic, the laws of mathematics, and then number 7, or 7 in my list here, 3 in the addition, human freedom and the ability to make choices. Christopher is somebody who is very concerned about human freedom as I am. But again, if we are just molecules in motion, how do we have human freedom? William Provine from Cornell, he's a materialist, a Darwinist. He points out that we don't have any human freedom if all we are is molecules in motion. Now, Christopher ought not scold anybody for being a snake-handling, Bible-thumping, fundamentalist preacher, because according to his own worldview, that person is that way because these are just chemicals going on in his brain. Neither could you say that Hitler had done anything wrong if it's just chemicals going on in his brain. I mean, what is the murder molecule? How much does justice weigh? These are questions that have no answer in a materialistic worldview, but that is Christopher's worldview. It seems to me that it makes much more sense to say that reason and laws of logic, mathematics, and human freedom come from a great mind that granted us these immaterial realities. The final argument is consciousness. Do you know that a heap of sand and a human brain have the same elements? Why are some carbon-based molecules conscious and others are not? Materialists have no answer for this. Daniel Dennett, another person who would agree with Christopher on many things, he's a materialist, says that consciousness is an illusion because he's a materialist. You're not really witnessing this right now. It's just an illusion. Now, one wonders if he was conscious when he wrote this. But again, there is no explanation for this in an atheistic worldview. Now, I have a couple other arguments on the bench, but I don't have time to get to them. Let me just sum up in 1 minute. We need to take all this data in context, not just one argument, but all of them. What is the best explanation? Christopher has to explain these 8 truths about the universe from an atheistic perspective. He must explain how the universe arose from nothing, how extreme fine-tuning and design arose from chaos, how life arose from non-life, how morality arose from materials, how reason and the laws of logic arose from matter, how mind arose from mud, how mathematics arose from molecules, how human freedom arose from blind repetitive forces, and how consciousness arose from chemicals. If he can't give evidence to explain these truths about reality from an atheistic perspective, if he's just going to state unsupported, speculative possibilities that rely on faith, then I think theism is a more reasonable worldview. Thank you for your attention. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Dr. Turek. We'll now have 20 minutes from Mr. Hitchens at his opening statement.
Let's see. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for coming. Thank you, Dr. Turek, for that very spirited opening to the evening. I should say first it's a great honor to be in the capital of the great state of Virginia. I'm, in a small way, a biographer of Thomas Jefferson, and his memorial, as you know, omitted the mention of his presidencies and vice presidencies and preferred to focus on his work at the university and his authorship of the Virginia Statute on Religious Freedom, which is the embryo and basis of the First Amendment to our Constitution, which makes this the only country in the world that has ever decided that God and constitutional matters should be separated. And it's in defense partly of that civilizational impulse that I rise this evening to satirize the idea that we're here by somebody else's permission and owe that person an explanation, which is what it is to be a theist, if not a deist at any rate. I almost never watch television, and I'm usually glad that I don't, but now I'm glad that I'm forced by my daughter to watch Family Guy. Because you may possibly have seen the moment when the chubby father comes down in the morning and looks at his cereal in the bowl, accepting one of your more sophisticated challenges.